At 10, in the last few minutes, President Trump pauses 25% tariffs on Canadian goods due to take effect tomorrow. Canada had been defiant in the war of words with its powerful neighbour to the south.
A 30-day delay in these tariffs that Donald Trump will claim as a victory.
Also tonight, with 14,000 people needing medical evacuation from Gaza, we have one girl's story. Just 2 years old, we're traveling with Habiba Al-Askari, suffering from a rare disease, making her way to Jordan for life-saving treatment. Here, a teenager has been arrested on suspicion of murder after the death of a 15-year-old boy stabbed at a school in Sheffield. And why scientists say there's a small chance an asteroid could hit the Earth within the next decade.
On Newsnight at 10:30 tonight, we'll bring you fresh insight on the stories of the day with big interviews and our regular panel of Newsnighters. And of course, look at what the papers are saying about tomorrow's news.
Hello there. In just the last few minutes, President Trump has paused 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, due to take effect tomorrow. Now, it follows talks on border security with Canada's leader, Justin Trudeau, and comes after a similar deal with Mexico, agreeing to reinforce the border with 10,000 troops to help tackle drug smuggling into the US. Now, clearly, the White House is using tariffs as a tool of foreign policy beyond economics. And Mr. Trump is still threatening 10% import taxes on China, which could have far-reaching consequences for us all. Tariffs are taxes on foreign goods, such as car parts or fresh produce, imposed as they enter a country. Therefore, they make imported goods more expensive. We'll be taking a look at what the impact could be on the UK of Mr. Trump's tariff agenda. We'll be getting a reaction in Canada and from Brussels. But first, here's Sarah Smith with the very latest from Washington.
President Trump packs a lot into a day in the White House, from congratulating a victorious hockey team to high-level international negotiations, where he quickly got what he wanted, from Mexico at least.
They've agreed to put in 10,000 soldiers permanently, like forever, 10,000 soldiers at their side of the border and stop fentanyl and illegal aliens from coming into our country. They have a big incentive to do.
The tide of illegal immigrants coming across the Mexico-American border is what Donald Trump really wants to stop, along with the smuggling of drugs like fentanyl. Mexico's plan to send thousands of soldiers to beef up border security is exactly the result he wanted.
Bien, ustedes?
And the Mexican president has succeeded in getting tariffs delayed for a month while a final deal is negotiated.
Llegamos al acuerdo.
We reached an agreement to place more National Guard troops on the northern border in order to protect the border and prevent drug trafficking, especially fentanyl, from Mexico to the US.
Relations between Donald Trump and the Canadian leader Justin Trudeau have never been easy. These days, President Trump teases him about making Canada the 51st American state. But the tariff threat is totally serious. The American anthem was loudly booed at sporting events in Canada this weekend, as their Prime Minister adopts a defiant position, threatening retaliatory tariffs on American goods.
Like the American tariffs, our response will also be far-reaching and include everyday items such as American beer, wine, and bourbon. As I've said before, if President Trump wants to usher in a new golden age for the United States, the better path is to partner with Canada, not to punish us.
First, we have for your signature...
It is an aggressive move, threatening these punishing trade tariffs to bully other countries from Canada to China and possibly beyond. But it does seem to be working.
Indeed, it does, Sarah. Tariff threats as a tool of foreign policy to basically get what he wants.
Yeah, and with Mexico, that seems fairly straightforward. He was very clear about needing more border security. That's what the president has promised for now, and you can see the basis of an agreement there. With Canada, it's slightly more complicated because the percentage of illegal immigrants or drugs like fentanyl that come across the Canadian border is minuscule. I mean, it's dwarfed by what happens in Mexico. So why is he pushing so hard on Canada? Well, he often talks about the trade deficit that there is between the two countries. More Canadian goods are sold into America than the other way around. And Donald Trump's making clear he wants it to be much easier for American goods to be imported into and sold in Canada. And notably, just in the last couple of minutes, he has said on X that this 30-day pause in trade tariffs with Canada will allow them time to talk about border security, but also to see whether a fair economic deal can be agreed between the two countries. So there's more to it when it comes to Canada.
Indeed, Sarah, thank you. Sarah Smith there live in Washington. So how will all this be received in Canada? Michelle Fleury is in Windsor, Ontario, which sits right on the frontier with the US. Michelle, one assumes the Canadians will be mighty relieved that there's a pause in all of this.
I mean, I think they're probably suffering from whipsaw right now because all throughout the day I've been talking to people and there was a sense of anger and outrage that a neighbour so close to them could treat them this badly. As you say, I'm standing here in Windsor, right over my shoulder. I don't know if you can see because the weather's pretty bad, but that is Detroit, an American city. This is part of the 5,000 miles of shared border between these two countries. And yet, because of Donald Trump's threat of tariffs, there was a sense that relations had become pretty rocky. If you went to the local liquor stores, in some cases, they were already pulling American brands from the shelves in retaliation, a kind of tit-for-tat activity. I was talking to a group of women earlier who basically were appalled. There was even one person I spoke to who'd cancelled her subscriptions to things like Netflix and Amazon Prime to American companies. This sort of sense of patriotism that had kind of been ignited really by the threat of tariffs on Canada. Now that it's been reversed, I think there will be a sigh of relief, but at the same time there will still be concern that some damage has been done. I mean, I was talking to a local businessman earlier and he said, you know, that we don't know how to invest. We don't know how to look at our partner, our big brother across the river here going forward. Can we trust them or not if we're making long-term investment plans? And I think that is sort of the damage that has already been brought just by the last few days.
All right, Michelle, thank you. Michelle Fleury there live in Windsor, Ontario, right on the border with the US. Well, after Donald Trump threatened the European Union with tariffs, leaders meeting in Brussels today condemned any move to apply import duties on goods. Emmanuel Macron of France said the EU would have to react and stand up for itself. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer said he wants good relations with the EU and America and will not choose between them. Chris Mason has the latest from Brussels.
The headquarters of the European Union, the club's leaders mingling here in Brussels. Their focus today, defence and Ukraine, but defending their trade with America uppermost in mind too. You can imagine how talk of tariffs has gone down here.
I think that we have to do everything to avoid this totally unnecessary and stupid tariff wars or trade wars.
What is clear, there are no winners in trade wars. If United States and the US start the trade war, then the one laughing on the side is China.
This is one of the most important issues today. I'm not going to start a war. I want to start negotiations.
The anger you heard there was prompted by President Trump describing the EU as an atrocity and saying it would face taxes on its imports into America.
They don't take our cars, they don't take our farm products, they take almost nothing. And we take everything from them, millions of cars, tremendous amounts of food and farm products.
His view clear about the European Union, cryptic about the United Kingdom.
And UK is out of line, but I'm sure that one, I think that one can be worked out. But the European Union it's an atrocity.
The president walking away from a weekend of tariffs and walking towards imposing more. Back in Brussels, a city of flags and international politics, you might ask why all this matters to your day-to-day life. In short, if international trade becomes trickier, more expensive, it can give economies the shivers. Look who's also here today. British Prime Ministers make less of a habit of rolling up in Brussels these days after Brexit, but the NATO Defence Alliance is based here as well. It was, though, the prospect of America imposing tariffs on the UK that dominated.
Early days, And I think what's really important is open and strong trading relations. And that's been the basis of my discussions with President Trump.
Prime Minister, would you be willing to water down your reset with the European Union in order to keep President Trump on side?
Both of these relations are very important to us. We are not choosing between them, but that's historically been the position of the UK for many, many decades now.
And tonight, the Prime Minister swapped NATO for the European Union, joining EU leaders for dinner and talking up the new deal he'd like with them.
We can have a better, closer relationship when it comes to trade and security. I'll be discussing this evening on questions of energy and on trade and the economy. And I think that's in the UK's interest, and I believe it's in the EU's interests as well.
But how much of this is possible, desirable, while maintaining a decent relationship with America? Soon enough, something is likely to have to give. And that dinner has wrapped up in the last half hour or so, and we've heard from Antonio Costa, who is the president of the European Council, saying the UK is our natural partner and there is a new positive energy in our relationship. That kind of good vibe shtick, still heavy in the language on both sides of the channel. A couple of other straws in the wind to bring you, though, tonight. A poll tomorrow from Ipsos that I've been given sight of this evening, suggesting that nearly half of people in Britain see our relationship with Europe as the most important. That compares with around 20% who cite America. And another trend worth pondering, the rise of Reform UK in opinion polls. They are champions of Brexit and indeed of Donald Trump. They have been steadily climbing in the polls, and there's a poll tonight from YouGov suggesting they have edged ahead of Labour and the Conservatives, albeit within the margin of error. It's just one poll and we're likely a long way from a general election, but boy, the bigger parties have really noticed Reform's rise. Both of those indicators a sense of the limited room for manoeuvre politically and diplomatically for the Prime Minister.
Indeed. All right, Chris, thank you for that. Chris Mason, our political editor, live in Brussels. Well, let's get more on why President Trump has been threatening tariffs on the likes of Canada, Mexico and China, and where could be next. Faisal's here to explain all. Faisal.
Thanks, Clive. Yes, we do now know President Trump is serious about using and threatening tariffs. The question is why? He's been a consistent critic over decades of America's trade deficit in general, and these are the latest goods deficit numbers. So how much more other countries sell in goods into the US than the US sells abroad? You can see the likes of China, Mexico and Canada all have imbalances which the president thinks are ripping off America. Now, the US also has a large deficit, as we were hearing, with the EU, over $200 billion. Think of German car exports, and the EU having its own tariffs and standards to protect its own farm produce. But at the end there, US-UK trade broadly in balance. In fact, on the US numbers, a small surplus for the US. Now, the EU Trade Commissioner says, for example, that the US may very well have a deficit on goods in red, but what about services? Well, that goes the other way, and you can see that in white. The US sells much more in services to Europe than the other way round. And look, that's true of almost all these jurisdictions. Examples of this include social media, Silicon Valley software, and Wall Street banking, exported to the rest of the world from the US, though it doesn't make up for the goods. Now, many countries are now trying to prevent tariffs by persuading the president that they will buy more from America, like gas and oil. But President Trump has also mentioned an alternative reason for all this, simply to raise money for his government. Now, here's the total value of imports into the US from the whole world per year, just under $4 trillion. Now, it's not far off the total value of national income taxes in the US, over $4.4 trillion. Now, under one plan, Mr. Trump wants to tax this bit more in the form of tariffs in order to lower the likes of income taxes over there. But to raise hundreds of billions or trillions even, as he said, it would have to be levied at a very high rate on every other nation, for example, including allies like the UK. So Britain's not first in the queue for the Trump tariffs, but may not be immune, especially when major powers, allies even, do start these tit-for-tat tariffs. Clive.
Faisal, thank you for that. Faisal Islam, our economics editor there. And Victoria will have more on President Trump's trade wars on Newsnight over on BBC Two shortly. Hi, Victoria.
Hi, Clive. Yes, we are going to be asking, is a European trade war with Donald Trump imminent or not? We'll ask the man who served as President Trump's ambassador to the EU in President Trump's first term. Plus, we're going to be talking about the new Ofsted changes, which are being brought in after the suicide of head teacher Ruth Perry. We will talk live to her sister to ask her what she thinks of them. That's Newsnight on BBC Two, BBC News and iPlayer in about a quarter of an hour. See you then.
Thanks, Victoria. On to other news now, and some of you may remember young Habiba al-Askari, who featured in our report from Gaza last week. Just 2 years old, she suffers from a rare disease that has cut off the blood supply to her limbs. The doctors treating her said she needed to be evacuated to a hospital outside of Gaza in order to save her life and some of her limbs. According to the United Nations, some 14,000 people need medical evacuation from the territory, among them more than 2,000 children. Fergal Keane has travelled with Habiba on the final stage of her journey to receive treatment in Jordan.
Habiba, 2 years and 4 months old, waiting for the evacuation that might save her life. Habiba has a rare blood disease. Her mother, Rana, who's endured anguish hoping Israeli authorities would allow her and Habiba out of Gaza. A week ago, we flew into the Gaza Strip with Jordanian forces delivering aid. But the Jordanians had also hoped to bring out wounded people, including Habiba. Israeli authorities didn't grant permission then. Our journalist visited Habiba in Gaza last week. 3 of her limbs are infected and can't be used, blackened now by a form of gangrene. One of her doctors from Manchester was seriously worried.
We are really pushing to try and get her medevaced out of Gaza as soon as possible in order to save her life and to try and salvage whatever is possible out of her limbs.
If she asks me for a biscuit, I cannot give it to her. If I hand it over to her, she gives me a look. I can't describe to you the look that she gives me.
Doing our morning ward round.
But then yesterday, the doctor sent us this video message. Habiba had been cleared for evacuation.
With a bit of luck, she'll be leaving the hospital today and travelling to Jordan. And we will go, our fingers crossed that's going to happen.
Then news came Israel wouldn't allow her mother to travel with her. At this point, Rana became very distressed. Out of respect for the family's wishes, we didn't film.
It's agonising for us. It's not how we feel, but it's agonising to watch the disappointment and the worry of her mother.
Then, overnight, the Israelis changed their decision, saying it was an exceptional humanitarian gesture to allow the mother to travel with her child. But in the confusion of the last hours, Rana wasn't sure if her 11-year-old son, Suhaib, could go with them.
It was a tiring effort, but it brought a result and I got permission. Now my son Suhaib is left. Oh God, please let me not endure the fire of being away from him.
The stress of so much confusion, of lives where they have no control. But then clarity. Suhaib could travel. They were on their way. Tonight, we witnessed Habiba's arrival in Jordan. Mum Rana exhausted. So much that is strange for Habiba. Even if this is a place of safety and hopefully healing.
This is one of those rare moments of positivity during this conflict. Habiba is now successfully here in Jordan. And behind me, you can see her mother there, and she's now being taken to the helicopter along with her daughter. The beginning of another journey.
Before we take off, Habiba calls for her mother. On board, just a few feet from me, reassurance for a child in a strange machine. A story of one human life, but a story about all humanity. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Jordan.
Here, a 15-year-old boy has died after being stabbed at a school in South Yorkshire. Another 15-year-old has been arrested on suspicion of his murder. It happened this lunchtime at All Saints Catholic High in Sheffield. Here's Danny Savage.
Outside All Saints School in Sheffield tonight, they came to leave messages for a boy who was stabbed to death here today. The enormity of what's happened proving too much for some. Others who knew him can barely comprehend the death of a friend.
But we don't know why it happened, because he was a sound mad anyway, always joyful in games and that.
It was shortly after midday when ambulance crews were called to reports of a stabbing inside the school. The area was soon sealed off by police. Parents who'd heard about some sort of incident gathered anxiously at the cordons, waiting for their children to be let out. Then, shortly after 3:30, South Yorkshire Police held a news conference, confirming people's worst fears.
Our thoughts are with the family of the boy, his friends, and the whole school community. At 12:17 p.m, emergency services were called to All Saints Catholic High School on Granville Road. The victim suffered serious injuries, and despite the best efforts of the ambulance service, he sadly died a short time later.
And the announcement that another school-aged child had been arrested.
A 15-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of murder and remains in our custody at this time.
Good evening, Prime Minister.
Tonight, the Prime Minister was asked about what had happened.
A young boy has gone to school and hasn't returned home, and so my first thoughts as Prime Minister and as a father are with the family.
This is the second incident at the school in recent days. Last Wednesday, police were called here to the school after what they describe as an altercation between two students. They say the situation was resolved and no injuries were reported. Tonight, All Saints School is a crime scene. It will not be opening tomorrow. And this evening now, the victim has been named locally as Harvey Wilgoose. Harvey was 15 years old. There are several tributes to him on social media I've seen tonight. One relative saying her heart is broken into a million pieces, and there are various other messages and tributes left to him on the flowers that have been put on the wall outside the school here tonight, and that school will of course remain closed tomorrow. As for the alleged attacker, he is also 15 years old, arrested on suspicion of murder. His case is therefore active, and because of his age he cannot be named legally because he is under 18 years old. There is still a long way to go in this investigation, Clive.
OK, Danny, thank you for that. Danny Savage there, live in Sheffield. A 14-year-old girl has been found guilty of attempted murder at Swansea Crown Court after attacking two teachers and another pupil at a school in Ammanford in South Wales in April last year. Howell Griffith has that story.
Calm before an eruption of violence as a student stares at her teacher before lunging towards her with a knife, stabbing her several times. A colleague tries to intervene, pleading with the pupil, before the knife is turned on her. As staff corner the teenager, she spots another pupil and runs to attack again, shouting, "I'm going to kill you." Fiona Elias was the girl's original target. She and Liz Hopkin, the teacher who stepped in, both say they thought they'd be killed.
Today's guilty verdict is not just for me, but for all teachers everywhere. No member of school staff should ever feel fearful for their own safety, merely for carrying out their duties.
This is the blade the girl used. She said she'd been taking knives to school for several years. Minutes before the attack, she sat in the hall, carving her name into the floor. That morning, she told another pupil she would stab one of her teachers. During the trial, the jury heard that the girl had been caught with a knife in her school bag several months earlier. She was allowed to return to classes, but only if her father carried out daily checks. On the day of the attack, she'd left the house early. After her arrest, she told officers what had happened would be on the evening news, and that would make her famous. The attack triggered a code red lockdown at Ysgol Dyffryn Comprehensive. Pupils were told to get to their nearest classroom and close the door. Parents were left waiting anxiously outside. Osian remembers the panic of the moment as pupils ran in every direction.
I saw her holding that knife with a teacher holding her back, which I was very grateful for that teacher putting himself at risk to protect others.
This case has once again underlined concerns about knife crime across Britain and the safety of staff and pupils in our schools. Hywel Griffith, BBC News, Swansea Crown Court.
Tom Simons is here with me. Tom, 2 stories, 2 schools, 2 stabbings. What is the prevalence of this kind of attack in our schools?
Well, clearly parents are going to be worried when they see 2 stories of that type on the news tonight. And I'm going to say eventually that schools are safe, basically. But just to give you the wider picture, the number of offences involving knives has been going up over the last 10 or so years. It went down a bit in COVID. It's still going up. The number of assaults, murders, attempted murders, killings involving knives, that has also gone up over the last 10 years, but has levelled out. About 1/5 of people accused of knife crime and convicted are children, and dozens of children or young people die in these sorts of attacks every year. But we've only been able to find 2 cases where a child has lost their life in a school stabbing in the last 20 years. Actually, 2 teachers have also died in 30 years. So it is incredibly rare. Having said that, there is a concern about the journey from school to home, where there are studies which say that's when children face the most risk.
Sure. OK. Tom, thank you. Tom Simons there. A former soldier has been sentenced to 14 years in jail for spying for Iran for cash and escaping jail while on remand. The judge said Daniel Khalif was a dangerous fool who handed over genuine military information to Iranian handlers, including the names of Special Forces soldiers. Khalif escaped Wandsworth Prison in September 2023 while awaiting trial on spying charges, but he was caught days later. Now, don't panic, at least not yet, because a newly detected asteroid thought to be the size of a large building now has a greater than 1% chance of colliding with the Earth in just over 7 years' time. Now, that would create a blast many more times powerful than that which devastated Hiroshima in 1945. Both NASA and the European Space Agency are meeting this week to discuss what to do. And Rebecca Morell is here with more details. Rebecca.
Thanks, Clive. Yes, well, asteroid 2024 YR4 was first spotted by a telescope at the end of last year. It's not that huge. It's estimated to be between 40 and 90 metres wide, and it's been found to have a very small chance of hitting the Earth at just over 1% on the 22nd of December 2032. Now, even though this is a tiny risk, this space rock now tops the list of the most dangerous asteroids. Scientists use the Torino scale to measure potential impact, which runs from 0 to 10.
0 means no problem, not going to hit. 3 means maybe we'll hit, but really we just need more observations. If the number ever gets up to 8, 9, or 10, then people should worry. But right now, this object is a 3 on the Torino scale. And all that means is that astronomers like me and my colleagues were paying attention.
Although there's a lot of uncertainty, the data so far suggests an impact corridor that extends across South America, the Atlantic Ocean, Africa and South Asia. So what damage could a collision cause? Well, in 1908, a similar-sized asteroid hit a remote patch of forest in Siberia, and this was the result. Millions of trees were felled across an area of 800 square miles. A strike like this on a city could be catastrophic. Now, we know the asteroid has an elliptical orbit and it's currently moving away from us. So telescopes on Earth and in space will be observing it while it's visible over the next few weeks. The hope is the risk will be downgraded, but if that's not the case, there is another option. In 2022, a NASA test mission smashed into another asteroid and changed its orbit, proving that a space rock can be deflected. Scientists have spotted seemingly dangerous asteroids in the past, but after gathering more data, they've realised they're no threat. So we'll see if that's the case for this space rock too. Clive.
All right, Rebecca, thank you. Rebecca Morell, our science editor there. Now, a pub promotion which offered a free pint every time Nottingham Forest scored at the weekend turned into a bit of an own goal. There was delirium and much lager downed at the Gedling Inn as Forest beat Brighton 7-0. The landlady reckons it cost the pub 300 pints.
And if you want to continue watching the BBC News at 10, please turn over to BBC One, or you can watch on iPlayer. Next, it's Newsnight.
Sir Keir Starmer says he doesn't accept the UK has to choose between the US and the EU. So how should the Prime Minister try to avoid President Trump's tariffs? And the new Ofsted changes following the suicide of head teacher Ruth Perry. We'll talk live to her sister. What does she think of the proposed new system? Welcome to Newsnight Live from Broadcasting House. Each weeknight, your panellists this evening. Editor-in-Chief of Joe Media, Ollie Dugmore, former Conservative Deputy Prime Minister Damien Green, and Baroness Hoey, not affiliated to any party in the Lords, a Eurosceptic who is in Washington for President Trump's inauguration. Right, Donald Trump's imposition of tariffs. He has threatened to do exactly what he promised during the election campaign, but breaking news, he's announced he's delaying tariffs on imports from Canada for a month. And earlier today announced 25% taxes on imports from Mexico were paused too. Both lots of taxes were meant to come in tomorrow, so the pause comes at the 11th hour. How will all this have gone down with EU leaders who are meeting in Brussels tonight? And they'd invited Sir Keir Starmer to dinner, the first time a UK PM has been invited to an EU summit since Brexit, overshadowing their dinner, I am sure, Donald Trump's warning that the EU is next in line for tariffs. Ben is here to talk about the economics. Nick is here to talk about the politics. So what's happened in the last hour?
Well, we had the deal to pause those US tariffs on Mexico earlier in the day. And in the last hour, we've heard that they're going to be paused. The Canadian ones will be paused. Very lengthy tweet from Justin Trudeau, who is the Canadian Prime Minister, answering those core concerns of Donald Trump. He's saying that Canada is going to implement our $1.3 billion border plan. There'll be new choppers and technology. And Canada's going to appoint a fentanyl czar. I mean, the key question is, where do we begin? And in a sense, we can begin with Alexander Hamilton, the first US Treasury Secretary, who was in favour of tariffs. Now, Scott Bessent, who is the new Treasury Secretary, pointed out that historical role, but he added a new post-Alexander Hamilton phase, which is Donald Trump believes in these tariffs as a negotiating tactic. That appears to be what we're seeing.
So, Ben, where are we left tonight with President Trump's tariffs war?
Well, Vic, to answer that, let's have a look at where we seemed
to be heading before this 11th hour change from President Trump? You can see there, this is the US average tariff rate going right the way back to the 1920s. And the dotted pink line, that's where we seem to be heading, the highest since the 1930s. Now, obviously a sigh of relief from financial markets tonight that for now at least we're not going up to there. But I think, Vic, speaking to analysts, they say don't underestimate the damage that this style of negotiation might well have done. The US, the most important economy in the world, potentially tearing up the North American free trade deal, which Donald Trump himself signed in his first term. The fact that you may not be able to trust the US not to tear up its own trade agreements, that can't be good for business investment. And the fact that we're even having to ask that question, people say don't underestimate the importance of that.
So what were the economic stakes then?
Well, potentially extremely high, and they may well still be. The IMF modelled a few years ago the impact of a general fragmentation of global trade, of the sort which these tariffs, this trade war, might well have led to. And they estimated that it could cost around $7 trillion knock that off the global economy. And I think we can see that now here. 7 trillion, about 7% of the global economy. And let's compare that to the size of two big national economies. Look, France and Germany is roughly the same size. So it would be the equivalent of losing those massive economies from the global economy. Now, look, hopefully we're not going to go there. But I think that we shouldn't assume that this is over. It's only a 30-day pause on these Mexican and Canadian tariffs. As far as we know, the Chinese tariffs that he has imposed are still going to come in tonight. And of course, he's threatened tariffs against the European Union to the BBC last night.
Yeah. And so, Nick, how does Sir Keir Starmer try and avoid tariffs on the UK?
Right, let's get into this. The view in the UK government is that countries that have, with whom the United States has a trade deficit, are vulnerable. The UK, I have a professor of economics here, has pretty much a trade balance with the US. So we're not so vulnerable. And those remarks overnight from Donald Trump shows that he's not got us in his sights in the way that he's got China, European Union, Canada and Mexico. But it is possible that we could be in his sights. It is possible he could say, you won't have any tariffs in the United Kingdom if you sign up to this trade deal. In those circumstances, we'd have to have a think about it. And it's no great surprise that any UK government, when there's the possibility of tariffs, does have up the back of their sleeves in the department a plan for potential retaliatory tariffs.
OK. Right, well, let's talk now to Donald Trump's former US ambassador to the EU, last time he was president. His name is Gordon Sondland. Hello to you, Mr. Sondland. Thank you very much for talking to our British audience. So the Mexico and Canada tariffs are paused at the 11th hour. What message should the EU, what message should the UK take from that?
I think the message is very clear. We've had a list of demands and requests of all of these friends for years and in some cases decades. And the results are similar every time. They'll take it under advisement, they'll think about it, they'll get back to us. And Donald Trump's had enough of that. This is a little bit of the Michael Corleone settling all the family business at once. The tariffs are designed to get attention, and if necessary, they'll remain in place until they have some economic bite. But it really gets people off their derrieres and gets them to the table to start to solve problems instead of talking and meeting endlessly.
OK, so it spurs them into action. But I wonder then if the EU could give Donald Trump a sort of token something. I mean, what he's got from Canada is a fentanyl czar. From Mexico, he's got a few thousand more troops on the border with Mexico when there were already 15,000 troops there. I mean, is that it?
Well, it's a beginning. Remember, there's another 30 days of discussion with President Sheinbaum. Trust me, there'll be a lot more on the table by the time this issue comes up again for a relook at the end of the month. When it comes to the EU, that's not going to be so easy to solve. The grievances between the US and the EU, again, the EU is our ally, is our friend, but the grievances have been on the table forever. The non-tariff barriers, the protectionism, the trade deficit, the impregnability of the European market compared to the US market, The list goes on and on and on. And there's going to have to be some tangible deliverables, or these tariffs will definitely go into place, in my view.
What does that mean, tangible deliverables? What, the EU has to buy more American stuff, American defence? What is it?
They have to let more American products into the EU market without either regulating them or tariffing them to death. When the US and the EU deal with one another, we're dealing with peers. If we sell you a vegetable or a car or a product, if it's safe to use in the US, it should be deemed safe to use in the EU. When EU citizens come to the US on vacation or to live here temporarily, they don't bring their own cars and their own food. They're perfectly safe eating our food and driving our cars. And it's high time the EU treated our products that way.
Right. Well, that might mean the EU and possibly the UK. I'll ask you what you think Donald Trump wants from the UK so that the UK can avoid tariffs. But that might mean, for example, lowering certain food standards, which might be a problem for the EU.
Well, it might be a problem. Then they'll have to live with the tariffs.
And then the EU will retaliate, which is exactly what happened in 2018.
Exactly. And at some point, people will come back to the table and make a deal.
Keir Starmer said today the UK doesn't have to choose between the US and the EU, does he?
No, I think the UK enjoys a very, very special relationship, unlike any other. And that's not to say there aren't going to be some negotiations and a little friction here and there. But I think that Keir Starmer and Donald Trump will work something out. I don't think there's any question about that.
And what is it you think President Trump wants from the UK?
Well, he's made his list very, very clear. I think that trade again is an enormous issue. I think support for some of our defense initiatives, where he's asking both the EU and the UK to do more than they're doing, because we always feel like we're doing the most. And when you combine the GDP of the entire EU plus the UK, it's significant, and you can do more.
And do you think the damage, which Ben was explaining to our audience earlier, to global markets, to business confidence, is worth it?
I don't think there will be damage. I think there's a lot of hair. Well, I think there's a lot of hair on fire going on. I mean, the talk about these sanctions has been clocked in a matter of hours and minutes, and now they've been suspended. Nothing has changed. The media loves to whip this stuff up, but what it really does is it brings people to the table to have a serious discussion where when they get up from the table, someone takes action instead of just scheduling another meeting.
Quick final thought. Do you care about Canadians booing the US national anthem?
No, they'll get over it.
Thank you very much for being with us tonight, Gordon Sondland.
Thank you.
OK, let's talk to our panellists here. Are you worried, Damien Green, that this could end badly for the UK?
I'm worried it could end badly for the world. I thought that the most interesting thing in Ben Chew's charts was the 1930s were the equivalent of what the Trump administration is threatening for the whole world, not just for Canada and Mexico. And remember what happened in the 1930s? It was the Great Depression. Mass poverty around the world led to some of the most unpleasant regimes the planet has ever seen. Let's not go back there. I do think that I accept that the Trump thought is that this is just a negotiating tactic. But it's a negotiating tactic that can go wrong. And I suspect the Chinese won't do a deal in 24 hours the way the Canadians and the Mexicans have. And I suspect the EU won't either. So there is a real underlying prospect of terribly damaging world economic problems.
Ollie Dugma, what does this mean, if there is a trade war, what does it mean for normal people watching Newsnight tonight?
Well, possibly quite calamitous, right? You know, if we see an increase in goods, inflationary pressure on prices, a result, banks probably won't want to cut their interest rates, national banks won't want to cut their interest rates, and so we're sort of stuck in the same position that we've been in for the last couple of years, if not worse. It's quite interesting. We've made a lot in the American elections, right, about the price of a box of eggs and whether or not the fact that they cost $10 is what led, you know, regardless of what Biden says about delivery, hurt people in their pockets, they won't vote for you. If we do get this trade war and we do see that upward pressure on American prices, you're really going to test the theory that what led to Trump getting elected was those economic pressures.
But when you hear Trump defenders, Trump supporters, they say, well, the American public have been here before, that they can cope with a bit of short-term pain knowing it's going to be for the benefit of them in the end. Do you think voters will buy that?
Well, Trump made it very clear that he wanted to support manufacturing and get some of the things that were not happening in America happening again. And I think people will be willing to wait that little bit longer before they get. But I mean, it may not even come to that.
Did he? Prices will go up in the short term, but it will be worth it in the end. He didn't say that.
Well, the thing is, no one really listened to what he said. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised about
it. Well, they did, and then they voted for it.
No, because he actually, I mean, here we didn't listen to the fact that he had said all along he was going to put tariffs on, and people said, oh, no, he's not going to do that, because he's a politician who, unlike a lot of other politicians, actually does what he says. So he's now threatened tariffs. I think the public in America will, for a short term anyway, put up with this, because they've seen so many other things that he's done in a very short time that they wanted. You know, some of the changes to the executive orders that he signed within 24 hours, that has pleased people. So I think, I mean, I just feel that we, as the British and the United Kingdom, have to be now making it very clear what we want out of this relationship with America, and how that fits in with what seemed to be the Prime Minister's determination to get closer and closer to the EU. And you have to ask yourself, why would anyone want to do that at the moment with the threats to the EU? I mean, Damon would, because he's a very strong supporter of the EU.
Well, I was a strong supporter of the Remain campaign, but that's nearly 10 years ago now. The world has moved on. And I think what's interesting, you know, when Keir Starmer says he doesn't want to have to choose, he doesn't think we have to choose, in a sense, that's not in his hands, because it depends what the EU does, it depends what the Americans do. I do think, I mean, on the basis of the interview we've just heard, that there is a sweet spot for Britain of leading the way of increasing defence spending, which we ought to be doing anyway.
With what money?
Well, that's an issue for the government, if they would stop sort of wasting money.
I think civil service jobs was the official policy that I believe you stood on at the general election.
Indeed, and that would be a jolly good thing to do. And what we've seen is the civil service increasing since the general election. So, you know, they're not actually pro-growth, whatever Rachel Reeves says every time she opens her mouth. But anyway, I think there is a way for Britain to manage the relationship with the United States in a way that would be constructive, but we have got to be determined to do things on things like defence and security.
I mean, we are very lucky. We're very lucky. We know that this president loves the United Kingdom much more than any other president has. You know, Scottish mother, all those sorts of things. And what was so annoying was that, you know, the Prime Minister was in power for 5 months while all this campaigning was going on in America. He should have been behind the scenes, not personally, but behind the scenes doing a lot of reaching out.
Well, we don't know that he wasn't.
All they did was send people out to campaign for...
I think he and Lammy went to Washington, didn't they? They did before the election.
Well, obviously not enough.
Well, they went to New York for the UN General Assembly and managed to get a meeting in Trump Tower, which was a bit of a coup, arranged by Karen Pierce, the outgoing ambassador.
But we heard overnight, so hang on, we heard overnight from President Trump that compared to the EU, where he said he'd definitely be imposing tariffs, there was probably a way out of it for the UK, because he had a nice conversation with Keir Starmer.
Well, I think it probably has slightly more to do with the fact that, depending on whose books you look at, we either have a very narrow trade surplus or a very narrow trade deficit, whereas the EU's deficit is colossal with the United States. I think, additionally to that, Nick, you referenced it, I don't think it's a grand sort of geopolitical strategy, but we find ourselves now outside of the EU, and therefore we'll duck that bullet. And I guess the third part is possibly the fact that we haven't imposed tariffs on some other goods. Chinese electric vehicles is probably another example of that. So
I think Starmer should announce tomorrow that he's going to give up on selling off the Chagos Islands. I think that would go down brilliantly with Trump.
I completely agree. I mean, it's even if Trump didn't exist, as it were, we shouldn't give the shouldn't pay to give away the Chagos Islands. That's ridiculous.
Then, of course, we know that President Trump would love to come and visit us all, perhaps even come on Newsnight.
Well, that would be incredible. He absolutely would have a seat on our sofa, of course. And a state visit, we're told, is in the offing at some point, which no doubt will go down well with the Trump team, whenever that may be.
But it's just so sad that today, our Prime Minister is having dinner with the EU 27 when no doubt they'll not be talking about all the things they were going to talk about. They'll be talking about tariffs and so on. And, you know, really, why is he rushing to go back to... Why does he want to be the first Prime Minister to have dinner with the EU 27 since we left?
They're our largest trading partner.
Yeah, so what? You don't have to
we
go
have
and
shared security and defence interests.
You can individually deal with each country.
Yeah.
You don't have to treat them as if we're still in the European Union.
And that dinner tonight, the main discussion was defence. It's an informal European Council. It was all about defence. It was chaired by Kate's favourite person, Donald Tusk, who is now the Prime Minister of Poland and was the President of the European Council during the Brexit referendum, and he believed he didn't really take Brexit terribly well. Anyway, it's defence, and Keir Starmer is putting a 5-point plan on the table. We've just learnt in the last few minutes or so of what he said at this dinner tonight. A 5-point plan on defence. Ukraine top of the list. Number 5, interestingly, deepening industrial collaboration, saying we should work together. Fragmentation weakens us all. And this really goes back to the Theresa May approach, which was defence. That was the idea. That would be part of the formal relationship. That sort of fell by the wayside with Boris Johnson. There's a very strong view that we should, from this government, we should have a bespoke defence agreement. Maybe that can oil the wheels for a larger resetting of the relationship, but a very strong view from the Cabinet that what Emmanuel Macron was supposedly talking about today, which is the UK is a demandeur. The view from the Cabinet, we are not a demandeur. We have a lot we can put on the table.
That's exactly the point, I think. One of the most depressing things has been Macron's response, as though, oh God, we're going to do the Brexit negotiations all over again. Britain leading the way on security and you know, I haven't seen the 5-point plan, but whatever it is, actually would serve 2 purposes. One, it's to Europe's benefit. We've got, you know, the Russians in Ukraine. It's a huge existential problem for the Baltic states and for Poland and so on. So that's in Europe's interest. It's not particularly in Britain's interest. And it serves to oil the wheels of a decent relationship with the US as well.
Yes.
So there is an absolute win-win, not just for Britain and America, but for Europe and America as well. So they would be very well not to say, oh, you want this, so in return we want all your fish or whatever.
And is there going to be any extra money for NATO as in the 5-point plan? Because, I mean, that's what Trump wants.
So the Cabinet's view is NATO is the absolute bulwark of European defence.
Right.
Absolutely committed to that.
So they're going
UK
to pay more.
part of that.
They're going to pay more.
But the EU is doing things. It's doing things in Ukraine, and the UK view is that we can be part of that and we can help on Ukraine and things like that.
Yes, but are they going to pay anything more to NATO? To individual
Ukraine,
countries?
To Ukraine? Well, there is a big demand from the UK that EU countries,
Trump,
NATO member states need to up their spending. That's very much been the message from David Lammy.
Anything that we can learn from Theresa May's approach to Donald Trump when he came here? Can Keir Starmer take advice from Theresa May at all, or not?
Not to go down steps.
So I don't hold his hand.
Yeah.
Well, that was down to him, as I remember. He sort of grabbed her.
He doesn't like going down.
But yes, he didn't like walking down steps. So weirdly, there is a serious point behind this. The sort of trivia of choreography is that the choreography matters, and the truth is we do have a lot to offer Donald Trump in terms of history and pageantry and things he likes about this country. So if I had a piece of advice, it would be absolutely promise a state visit, but push it back a bit.
Can I say he should come to the Open Golf Championship being held in Portrush next?
Good
possible
plug for Northern Ireland there.
Okay.
Very good.
Back with you soon. Next, Ofsted has announced proposals for new rules for school inspections in England. Schools did used to get outstanding, good, requires improvement and inadequate when inspected. This was scrapped last year following criticism of the system after the death of the head teacher Ruth Perry. Mrs Perry took her own life after an Ofsted report downgraded her primary school in Reading from the highest rating of outstanding to its lowest rating, inadequate, over safeguarding concerns. A coroner concluded the inspection in 2022 contributed to Mrs Perry's death. In future, schools will be given a report card like this one, in which 9 key areas, yes, put your glasses on to have a look at that, including leadership or behaviour, will each be graded on a 5-point scale from causing concern to exemplary. We'll talk to Ruth Perry's sister in a moment. First, here's the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, talking earlier today about the government's new proposals.
Our proposals will swap single headline grades for the rich, granular insight of school report cards. raising the bar on what we expect from schools, shining a light on the areas that matter, each given their own grade, identifying excellence and rooting out performance that falls short of expectations, so that parents have clearer, better information about their local schools.
Well, let's talk now to Professor Julia Waters. Thank you very much for being with us on Newsnight. These changes are happening because your sister took her own life. Are these new proposals an improvement on the old system in your view?
To me, it just looks like they are the old system rehashed with a rather alarming colour coding to emphasise those 1- and 2-word judgments which are being kept to judge schools. I don't believe for one moment that there has been the input of mental health and suicide prevention experts into the creation of this system.
Do you know that for sure?
Well, I don't believe that any suicide prevention expert would condone a system that has a traffic light system with the areas of concern highlighted before the areas of strength, for instance. And when in the past the Education Select Committee last year, after their parliamentary inquiry, recommended doing away with single word judgments, they recommended that Ofsted and the DFE look at other examples of school accountability systems. They did not say, let's have 5 single or 2-word judgments to replace the 1.
So this system wouldn't have made any difference to your sister because it's still putting stress on teachers. Is that the point?
It is still putting stress on teachers. I mean, there are changes that they are proposing, like removing safeguarding from the leadership and management category, that is a very sensible thing to do. It's one that I had asked for, that I had pushed for, clarifying what is meant actually by safeguarding. You know, there are things in there that are good and that are moves in the right direction, or changes that have already been implemented that are being kept. But there are areas that I do not feel have been properly addressed. The impact of inspection upon the well-being of teachers and head teachers should be at the centre of these reforms,
but it's not. Is there any system anywhere which involves an inspection which isn't going to mean some pressure on teachers?
Of course there's always pressure, but it's where that pressure is disproportionate. It's where the consequences of an inspection that is there for 2 days can mean the end of a head teacher's job, their career, the public shaming and humiliation that goes with that. And I find it frankly galling that a system that's all about the accountability of schools has no checks and balances of its own. Ofsted in this new system has not heeded calls to strengthen its own accountability. And if I may, I found it deeply ironic that the definition of not meeting safeguarding, according to this new measure, this new proposal, is that there is a closed culture, that leaders are not open to challenge and do not learn from issues and incidents. That could be a description of Ofsted's response to my sister's death.
You have fought so hard since your sister's death, for your sister. It sounds like you are going to keep fighting.
Until I feel that there's real change, I don't feel I have any choice but to keep fighting. Yes, I'm doing it because what happened to Ruth was a terrible injustice and was preventable. And I'm doing it for all the teachers and head teachers out there who have been contacting me in their hundreds, telling me about the terrible pressures and stress that Ofsted causes to them. And if the government is sincere about wanting to recruit more teachers, it needs to do something urgently about one of the main causes for the retention problem we have, why teachers and head teachers are leaving education in their droves.
Thank you very much for talking to our audience tonight. Thank you, Professor Julia Waters. Let's take a look at some of the front pages of the newspapers. The front page of The Guardian, Starmer faces Labour revolt over backing for oil field. The Daily Mail, what a time to be crawling back to the EU. That reflects our conversation slightly earlier. And if you want to carry on watching Newsnight, please turn over to BBC Two or watch on iPlayer.
Do stay with us here on BBC News for all the latest headlines in the US and around the world from the team here in Washington.